I'm Tina Frühauf, Director of the Barriers Brook Center for Music Research and Documentation, and our center is delighted to host a major conference called Voicing Innocence to accompany the path-breaking performance of Kaya Sariaho's Innocence at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. Let me begin with a few words about the Brook Center itself. Founded in 1989 by Barriers Brook, one of the great musicologists of the 20th century, the center was envisioned as a hub for research that both respected tradition and embraced change. In that spirit, the center today is home to a number of major scholarly projects, each rooted in rigorous documentation and open to interdisciplinary dialogue. These include databases, editorial ventures, and digital humanities initiatives that span genres, languages, and continents. We are situated here at the CUNY Graduate Center in the heart of one of the most musically vibrant and ethno-diverse cities in the world. That's not just an accident of geography. It's a commitment to understanding music not in isolation, but as part of lived culture shaped by communities, by politics, by memory, and by movement.
Tina, so why build an entire 2-day conference around Kaya Sariaho's work and Innocence in particular?
Kaya Sariaho stands as one of the most significant opera composers of the past quarter century, and Innocence represents the culmination of her life's work, a final masterwork completed just before her death. When Innocence premiered at Aix-en-Provence in 2021, it was immediately recognized as something extraordinary. Simon Rattle reportedly told conductor Susanna Melki, "It's like watching Wozzeck being born." That comparison to one of the cornerstones of 20th century opera signals the work's importance. But Innocence is not merely a great opera. It is an opera that fundamentally expands what opera can do. It unfolds across multiple timelines and perspectives, with characters singing in 8 different languages: Finnish, French, German, Czech, Spanish, Swedish, Greek, and English, without translation within the world of the opera. This multilingualism is not decorative. It's a narrative and ethical condition, reflecting how trauma fragments communication and how we struggle to find shared language in the aftermath of violence. The opera confronts a school shooting, a subject painfully resonant in our time, and it does so with remarkable complexity. Echoing director Simon Stone, this wouldn't work if it felt like it was only a comment on access to guns, and it wouldn't work if it were a comment on schools. But teenage mental health, school settings as a microcosm, that's universal. Anyone who's gone through grief or not understanding what's happening to their child will find this meaningful. Building a conference around Sariaho's work, and Innocence specifically, allows us to do justice to this complexity. The opera demands sustained interdisciplinary attention, from musicologists who can analyze its innovative score, from trauma scholars who can contextualize its psychological insights, from theater practitioners who can illuminate its staging, and from ethicists who can grapple with the questions it raises about memory, forgiveness, and representation.
What do you hope someone who has never seen a Kaya Sariaho opera or doesn't even think of themselves as an opera person necessarily will take away from attending the conference?
First and foremost, I hope they leave understanding that contemporary opera is not a museum piece. It is a living, breathing art form capable of speaking directly to the most urgent questions of our time. Innocence deals with grief, with memory, with violence, and the possibility of forgiveness. These are not esoteric concerns. They are the stuff of human experience. Second, I hope that they discover that Sarajevo's music speaks in ways that feel immediate and visceral. One critic described experiencing Sarajevo's music as hearing sounds that feel organic and substantive, where electronics and extended techniques serve the composition's intentions rather than feeling gimmicky. Her work has this remarkable quality of drawing you in, of making you feel sound in your body. When cellist Ansi Kartunen described the electronic element in her piece, Pedals, as the opening up of a fourth dimension, he captured something essential about how her music expands our sensory experience. Third, I hope that they encounter ideas that change how they listen, not just to opera, but to all music. One of the conference's goals is to model ways of listening that attend to texture, to silence, to the space between sounds. Presenting to audiences from different disciplines requires thinking carefully about how to frame this work and find a shared language. We are designing this conference with that spirit, creating entry points for non-specialists while maintaining intellectual rigor. Finally, I hope audiences feel invited into a community. Opera can seem intimidating, even exclusive, but the questions Innocence raises belong to all of us. If someone attends who has never considered themselves an opera person, I hope that they discover that opera can be a space for collective reflection on the things that matter the most.
What are some of the big questions about trauma, violence, and memory in opera and music that you intend to explore?
This is at the heart of the conference. We are organizing our inquiry around several interconnected questions. How does music give voice to the unspeakable? Trauma, by its nature, resists direct articulation, yet music, with its capacity for abstraction, its ability to convey emotion without explicit representation, may access experiences that language cannot capture. Sarajevo's use of extended vocal techniques, electronic processing, and spectral harmonies creates what we might call a sonic psychology, a way of rendering interior states audible. How does this work, and what can it teach us about the relationship between sound and psyche? What are the ethics of staging violence? When an opera depicts a school shooting, as Innocence does, what are the responsibilities of composers, librettists, directors, and performers? How do you represent trauma without exploiting it, without turning suffering into spectacle? These questions become even more urgent when the opera travels to countries like the United States, where gun violence is a daily reality. Scholars of Holocaust and genocide studies have wrestled with similar questions about representation and memory. And I aim to bring that interdisciplinary wisdom as a Holocaust scholar into dialogue with opera studies. How does operatic form itself mirror traumatic experience? Innocence unfolds through multiple timelines, fragmented perspectives, and languages that coexist without translating each other. One Russian musicologist has analyzed how the opera combines the genres of opera and thriller, creating a long-lasting emotional build-up that immerses audiences in a state of anxiety and fear. This formal innovation isn't just clever construction. It's a way of making the audience feel something of what traumatic experience feels like. Disorienting, multi-layered, resistant to simple narrative. Can opera serve as a space for collective memory and healing? This is perhaps the largest question. What does it mean to gather in a theater and witness a work about violence and its aftermath? Does that act of collective attention have the power to transform how we process trauma individually and collectively? These questions connect Saryaho's work to broader conversations about music's role in social justice, commemoration, and human rights.
You bring together scholars from different disciplines, philosophy, music, theater, and from other countries like Finland, Japan, and Italy. Why is having an interdisciplinary and international conference important to you?
Innocence itself is a profoundly international and interdisciplinary work. Saryaho was Finnish, living in Paris. Her librettists were Sophie Oksanen, also Finnish, and Alexis Barrière, Finnish-French, based between Paris and Helsinki. The opera's premiere was in France. Its characters come from multiple countries and sing in their native languages. As Rilm's annotated bibliography notes, the opera resists a single linguistic or cultural vantage point. Any adequate response to the work must do the same. Bringing together scholars from different disciplines reflects our conviction that innocence cannot be understood through musicology alone. Trauma studies helps us to understand its psychological dimensions. Theater studies illuminates its staging and dramaturgy. Philosophy grapples with its ethical questions. Memory studies contextualizes its engagement with the past. When scholars from different fields listen to each other, new insights emerge. Interdisciplinarity and collaboration are essential in academic growth, and while our focus is artistic rather than therapeutic, the principle holds. Complex problems require multiple perspectives. The international dimension is equally essential. Finland, Japan, Italy, among other nations, each brings different understandings of operatic practice, different relationships to Saryaho's music, different cultural frameworks for understanding trauma and memory. Moreover, international conferences create connections for future collaborative projects, which undoubtedly yield remarkable results and demonstrate the effectiveness of strong partnerships between institutions. We are building not just a conference, but an ongoing network of scholars and artists committed to this repertoire.
The conference includes artists and collaborators from Kaya Saryaho's creative circle, including her son and librettist Alexis Barrière, her husband and composer Jean-Baptiste Barrière, performer Vilma Yeh, and librettist Sophie Oksanen. What do they bring to the conversation?
These people are the people who knew Saryaho's work from the inside, who sat in the room with her, who shaped the operas alongside her, who carry forward her artistic legacy. Their presence transforms the conference from scholarly analysis into living dialogue. Alexis Barrière is not only Saryaho's son, but also co-librettist on Innocence, responsible for managing the opera's multiple languages and overall dramaturgy. Since her death, he has taken on partial responsibility for her estate, overseeing the stage works. He brings an unparalleled understanding of how Innocence was conceived and constructed, the hundreds of creative decisions that shaped its final form. He also brings the complex perspective of someone who has lost a mother while inheriting responsibility for her art. In a recent interview, he described his family's position as very peculiar because we have also been collaborators. We have approached Kaya from different perspectives. That multiplicity of perspectives, son, collaborator, executor, is exactly what will enrich our conversations. Jean-Baptiste Barrière, Saryaho's husband and a composer in his own right, worked alongside her for decades. He handled other musical matters in her estate. His perspective on her compositional process, their creative partnership, and the years of work that produced Innocence is irreplaceable. Sophie Oksanen, the acclaimed Finnish novelist who co-wrote the libretto, brings the literary and dramatic vision that shaped the opera's narrative. Her understanding of character, structure, and the ethical challenges of representing violence comes from deep creative engagement with these materials. Vilma Yeh, the Finnish folk musician for whom Saariaho composed specific roles, represents something particularly precious, the living performer, whose voice and artistry were directly inscribed into the score. Saariaho composed with particular singers in mind. Ye can speak to what it feels like to embody that music, to become the vessel for a composer's final inspirations. Together, they ensure that our scholarly conversations remain grounded in the reality of creative practice, in the decisions, struggles, and discoveries that brought innocence into being.
The event ends with a concert, Saariaho with electronics. Why was it important to make performance itself part of the conference, and what do you hope audience members take away from it?
Saariaho's relationship with electronics was fundamental to her artistic identity. From her earliest days at IRCAM in Paris, the Computer Music Research Center founded by Pierre Boulez, she was experimenting with ways to combine acoustic instruments with electronic processing. One critic described hearing her electronic works as experiencing sounds that feel mammoth, full of rich overtones and a depth of sound that would have been impossible by strings and woodwinds alone, while also creating subtle echoes or rounder tones that draw listeners closer. This is music that envelopes you, that surrounds you, that works on your body as much as on your mind. Including a concert in the conference reflects our conviction that scholarship about music must ultimately return to the experience of music itself. You can analyze scores, study libretti, theorize about trauma and memory, but none of that substitutes for the direct encounter with sound. Music and sound performances inspire our creativity and strengthen the sense of connection and community among the event's participants. The concert format also honors Saariaho's own practice. Her work with electronics evolved in tandem with the means of sound processing. She was always pushing toward new possibilities, new combinations of live performance, and technological mediation. A concert focused on her works with electronics allows us to trace that evolution, to hear how her thinking developed across decades. What do I hope audience members take away? First, a visceral understanding of why Saariaho's music matters, not just intellectually, but physically and emotionally. Second, an appreciation of how electronics can expand musical expression without feeling gimmicky or gratuitous. Third, a sense of connection to the performers, bringing this music to life, to other audience members, sharing the experience, and to the broader community gathering around Saariaho's legacy. And finally, I hope they leave with questions, new ways of listening, new curiosities about contemporary music, new desire to engage with operas they might previously have thought inaccessible. Performance isn't an add-on to the conference's intellectual work. It's the culmination, the reason we gather, the experience that reminds us why all this scholarship matters.